titled Trump's Tariff Tantrums, The Way Forward for India. This is part of our Nazariya series, where we invite a range of scholars and experts from all across the globe to discuss contemporary and very relevant themes and issues. Today's topic is especially interesting and relevant. Tariffs have become a key part of President Donald Trump's strategy, especially trade strategy, often announced or changed very suddenly. At the flick of a switch, he has significantly dialed up and down this rhetoric on tariffs and trade and whatnot, both ones in place and the once he is threatened. He promised higher tariffs on day one of his second term. From the beginning of Feb this year, he started signing executive orders imposing different percentages of tariffs on different countries. Then comes some calm, some pause on these tariffs, again followed by what he called the Liberation Day on April 2nd, when he announced universal and reciprocal tariffs. Then come negotiations, federal court orders, and trade deals, some of which eventually materialize and some don't. Alongside all this, earlier this month, Trump threatens to impose additional tariffs on India starting from August 27 if the country keeps importing more Russian oil, chastising India for funding Russia's war and the killing of Ukrainians. This felt dubious, especially given that the US has increased its trade with Russia ever since Trump got elected again. And even China's Russian oil imports have been much higher than India's. The story became much more interesting when a couple days back, the US and Russian presidents met in Alaska on August 15th and discussed a potential peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. The summit basically seemed to be a very interesting U-turn for Trump's position on the Russia-Ukraine war and what peace really means in that situation. What seemed to be warmth in US-Russia ties, it did not really translate into any toning down of Trump's rhetoric when it came to India. Thus, this re-engagement and bonhomie between US and Russia did not seem to be leading to any course revision of US trade or tariff policy with regards to India. In this context, what are the possible avenues or options to shore up India's trade relationships? What are the lessons for India here, especially with regards to diplomatic relations? And how can national interest be better aligned with foreign policy objectives? What can be possible measures and countermeasures to ensure India's strategic autonomy? So these are some of the lines of thinking and questions that guided the idea behind organizing today's panel discussion. I'm very thankful to our three panelists who very graciously agreed to joining and sharing their insights. Our panelists, firstly, we have Professor Dr. Vesselin Popovski, Professor and Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School, and Executive Director of Center for the Study of United Nations. Professor Popovski has a PhD from King's College London and an MSc from LSE. Before coming to India, between 2004 and 2014, he was a senior academic officer at the United Nations University in Tokyo. After 2007, he was head of its Peace and Governance program, and after 2010, also head of the UNU Press. Dr. Niranjan Sahoo is a senior fellow with Observer Research Foundation's Governance and Politics Initiative. With years of expertise in governance and public policy, he now anchors studies and programs on democracy, human rights, federalism, electoral reforms, and cross-cutting issues of exclusion, insurgencies, affirmative action, and inclusion. A recipient of the Asia Fellowship and a former Sir Ratan Tata Fellow, he currently serves as the South Asia member for the Carnegie Rising Democracies Network, where he debates and writes on democracy, foreign policy, and other related issues. Our third panelist has joined us online, Professor Mohsin Raza Khan. He is the Professor and Associate Dean at Jindal School of International Affairs. Professor Khan has a Master's in International Economics and International Relations from Johns Hopkins with a specialization in South Asia. He also has an MA in Global Political Economy from the University of Hull. The discussion will be chaired by Professor Deepanshu Mohan, Dean of Ideas. Oh, okay. Very graciously, we had a lot to tell about Professor Mohan, but I'm sure you all already know. So we'll get started with the discussion. Firstly, Professor Mohan will be addressing us for a couple minutes. Then we'll have the panelists say for 10 minutes, they'll be giving their introductory remarks. And then the chair will lead the discussion where he'll be asking some pointed questions to each of the panelists for say about 30 minutes. And then we open up for a Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Prachi, and a huge round of applause for Prachi. Actually, she's the one who's in very short notice, along with Nasima, Saqib, and the whole team and ideas put this together. I just felt, I think, a couple of weeks back that we were not talking about Trump, who everybody is talking about on campus, with respect to how a US president is behaving, and that's sort of turned and upended the whole sort of world order on its feet. And the last few months, for those who have been observing, has been particularly vital, not just as observers of geopolitical or world affairs at large, but what's really going on, right? Like, how do we make sense of it? And there's so many, you can have a whole series of talks organized. My sense was this would be sort of a starting point, and then see how we take the conversation forward. I want to just very, very quickly give a context of the speakers and the profile of the speakers, not in terms of just the area and the background. I mean, Prajesh already introduced them to you, but the context of this conversation requires a sort of a three-pronged approach. You need to understand the geopolitical scenario. At the same time, India is at a very crucial juncture right now, not just as an economy, but as a polity and as an actor, which aspires to be a strategically important anchor in the global landscape. Strategically speaking, as you know, India is in partnership with many countries. But how do we really make sense of where India is positioned right now, how it needs to realign? It has its own problems in the neighborhood, but at the same time, it has global aspirations, and it is already present in many strategic, multilateral, plurilateral partnerships. So the conversation is a lot about making sense of the now for the future context. And of course, the uncertainty makes it very difficult to talk about maybe years down the line, but the months ahead of us. And I must thank Professor Vesselin in short notice for consenting to be part of this. He's been an intellectual mentor to few of us from the very moment our center started, that is Center for New Economic Studies. He's been always supportive of the kind of work that we have been doing. Niranjan, who's I can count as a friend, he's been someone who I've looked upon his work on looking at the federal structure of governance, the sharing of India's own domestic economy, understanding the landscape in which India's own inequities, informality makes sense and exacerbates. Niranjan's eye on things is very, very valuable. Mohsin, of course, who unfortunately is not here in person, but as he joins virtually, his insights on issues from geopolitics to local economy and also sociocultural factors are always valuable. Before I start, I just want to take exactly a short minute asking each one of you to just speak of your first name and where are you from. When I say where are you from, as in which school, or if you're attending this, be very good because we want to keep it as interactive as possible. So if you can just start very quickly.
Hi, good morning. I'm Abhinav Mishra. I'm from the JGPS school. And
thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adya, and I'm a fourth year in JGLS.
My name is Sukriti. I am also a fourth year in JGLS.
Hello, I'm Sakshi. I'm from JSIA. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanuka, and I'm from JSIA.
Jaberi, and I'm from JSIA.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pavan, and I'm also from JSIA. Thank you.
School of Psychology and Counseling, right? Yeah. Law School.
Yeah, greetings, everyone. This is Akshat Verma, and I'm a first year LM student from JGLS.
I'm Zui and I'm also from JGLS.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Achal Mathur. I'm a doctoral candidate at JSIA. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jodh and I'm from JSI as well.
Speak loudly. Just wonderful. So that's what Ideas is trying to do, right? Bring a culture of collaboration and a spirit to socialize for students across schools to come and participate. So you have a ton load of activities, guys, in front of you. Just, I know your mails get spammed with a lot of content, but that's the only way for you or us to reach out to you as one of the ways. So please continue to participate, actively engage. Let me start by, if you want me to sort of go ahead or, okay. So I'll start maybe the conversation with Professor Vesselin. And as I said, the conversation is a lot about the geopolitical landscape in which what we are seeing right now. How do we make sense, Professor, of what Trump has been doing? You know, the idea of transactional approach to foreign policy or using a real estate approach to foreign policy. How do we make sense of this?
First of all, thank you, Dipanshu and Prachi, for organizing this beautiful event with many students from across the schools. And I'm very privileged to address the institute, and I'm very happy to be invited today. Sorry. So the question, what does Donald Trump mean when he announces any new policy, new action, is difficult to deconstruct in itself, because the challenge is, as you correctly pointed, that there is no kind of a rational explanation. It's someone who acts in irrational way, but has a lot of power. And it kind of reminds me my time in the communist Bulgaria. By the way, you may not know, I used to be a diplomat in the time of I was a junior diplomat at the time of the communist government in Bulgaria in the late 1980s, and it was kind of similar. You basically listen to statements by elderly diehards communists who have all the power of the country. You cannot really do much against that, but they act in an irrational way. They are egoistic, narcissistic. They need to be pleased. When I was a student in the communist time, I have to start every essay by a quote from Karl Marx, from Vladimir Lenin. It is simply somehow to please the Communist Party. And then after that, you can say what you want to say, but that is like the license you need to kind of tick the box in the beginning as to follow up with what you understand. So it's very similar, by the way. And if you see the meeting in the White House a couple of days ago, that's exactly how the European leaders, there were all of them there, the European Union, NATO, Britain, France, Italy, with President Zelensky talking to Donald Trump, and they act in a way of pleasing a child. They want this child not to get angry, so they have somehow to recognize his infantile brain, but also to try to impress and try to say the right thing. So, and it's difficult, as I say. It's very difficult, first of all, to comment on what he says, because he doesn't know what he says. So it's really not really a child, it's the opposite. It's kind of the elderly person who doesn't understand everything he says. And a lot of this doesn't actually represent also the administration position. So, by the way, I just told this to Niranjan, I'm collecting articles for a special journal, a special issue of a journal where Fudan, University of Fudan in China, asked me to collect, and it is about generally saying Trump's damage. It's about how this time, the second administration, is damaging almost everything. If you take policies, concepts, international law, international relations, trade relations, regions, United Nations as a global organization, but also regional organization, ASEAN, South Asia, every country experience a time to readjust into this era where the biggest and most powerful country in the world behaves in a way which is contrary to everything that we established. And we, I mean the people of the world over the last 8 years since the establishment of the United Nations. So the principles, if you take the United Nations, are under challenge. Multilateralism is under challenge. Territorial sovereignty, political independence are under challenge. Human rights are in immense challenge, including inside the United States, including the treatment of students. The refusal of students. I have students who cannot go there. Migration and including, and very seriously, the misinformation, the kind of the fake news that are spread. That's, by the way, part of the election. This, you know, it was not the same in the first term. The first term, still the team was very still professional. There was kind of the inertia of a long democratic development. So the first term was damageful, but not as much as this one. And we see already for 7 months, I will say the last 7 months produced more damage than the entire first term of Donald Trump, although the kind of the action may seem similar. For example, the refusal to accept climate change, the refusal to authorize emissions reductions, the treatment of migrants and all of that. Because now it's very quick, there are actions basically to prepare possibly the ground. Again, Niranjan will correct me on that, whether this looks very much like 1920s, 1930s in Europe when Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin took power. And by the way, Anne Applebaum wrote about this in her latest book very well. You know Anne Applebaum and others. They are comparing Donald Trump with those dictators in Europe in the 1920s, exactly 100 years ago. Mussolini did the same thing, effectively destroying the judiciary, destroying the independence of the media, creating their own judiciary and their own media, effectively grabbing their entire, like a manual for dictators, and he followed exactly that. And the question remains in 3.5 years whether the next elections in the United States. So it's as serious as it is. We have to question democracy in United States. But back to the topic, because it's very difficult for any country, including big one like India, to act in such an entirely new environment, entirely new era. And again, from my experience, again, going back to the communist Bulgaria and how it takes effort, it takes attention to leaders who are powerful but act irrationally, as to not confrontation doesn't work. And if you remember, President Zelensky first meeting in the Oval House was very different from the meeting a couple of days ago. Saying the truth doesn't work, and that's worse. We are academic, we can say the truth. I'm not changing my discourse. I teach exactly what I taught last year. And academics can have the luxury to continue saying what we say. But politicians meeting Donald Trump cannot do. Somehow they need to play even with the truth. And we see like European leaders meeting Donald Trump also kind of trying to say part of the, and they reformulate already as to please Donald Trump, still to extract some opportunities for United States to provide a security guarantee in Europe. So basically the question in Europe is about security guarantee and how United States can continue to be a member of NATO and to keep its obligations to NATO members, including those that are affected by the Russian aggression in Ukraine, mostly the Baltic states, Poland, the neighboring country of Ukraine, and so on. And that's a difficult game, but I think generally they played it very well. They didn't confront Trump. He was smiling all the time. They are talking to him. And kind of the diplomats behind that high-level official meeting are doing the work with Marco Rubio, with the other diplomats in the State Department, and trying to keep the administration committed to what they should do. And again, it's a very difficult time. And I even in some of my presentations, I say that, in fact, Donald Trump, exactly the opposite of what he says, is prolonging the conflicts and the wars in the world. He claimed that he resolved 6 wars. Totally wrong. None of this is correct. India, Pakistan, you know better than me. It was long conflict and it goes to escalation, de-escalation, escalation, de-escalation. It's a zigzag, but effectively India and Pakistan managed the de-escalation. Donald Trump has absolutely no role in that. The same, he brings Kosovo. Kosovo and Serbia, they are first of all not in war. It's a long but very much frozen conflict. And there is absolutely nothing that Donald Trump delivered there. Well, Armenia and Azerbaijan, they decided to go to the White House in Washington and to sign the peace deal. But that's somehow to have a bit of a maybe more media exposure. Again, Armenians and Azerbaijani, the two governments did the deal. Trump did nothing, but they went to sign the deal and he kind of presented that's another war he ended. On Ukraine and Russia, actually the war is worse today than a year ago. So there is actually escalation and more military fight between Russia and Ukraine. And if we take Israel and Gaza, it's still the same, if not worse, like a year ago. So Donald Trump does not really contribute. All these meetings, Witkoff going to Russian capital, Moscow, they don't deliver much, exactly with the approach of, you named it very well, Dipan. It's kind of a transactional real estate attempt to make a deal. But as we know, the world is so complex that you cannot make a real estate deal. It's not to match the price of the seller and the buyer. There are hundreds, if not thousands, factors that you need to take into account, and he doesn't. He doesn't listen even to the think tanks. He destroyed the think tanks. They used to have a U.S. Institute for Peace, and it's no longer there. The people who could have told him what the history, he doesn't know those countries. He doesn't know where is Armenia and Azerbaijan, where is Congo and Rwanda. And he pretends he solved the conflict. If you don't know the country, how do you, and the history of those countries, how do, and even Congo and Rwanda is not solved. They are still fighting in Eastern Congo. So it's very, very difficult, but it's possible with some maneuvering here between what he wants to hear and how to still promote your policy. Now, tariffs are tough because it's a new, again, we are in new territory. Nobody else used tariffs in the past to manage bilateral relations. And I absolutely agree that India faces the challenge of the tariffs. What I can say here is that the question whether the tariffs were imposed on, it was presented as because India continues to buy Russian oil. That's questionable because Trump doesn't care about Ukraine at all. He doesn't care about human life, human rights. That's not in his brain. But using that was something for India to think about. And it's not the judgment of Donald Trump, it's the judgment of the history. Whether India wants to be seen in 20, 40 years from now as a country that did not stop buying Russian oil and gas. Because many countries did stop. My country did. Bulgaria was 90% dependent on Russian oil and gas. We stopped it in a day. It was we were lucky because the Russians stopped it. They wanted us to pay in rubles. We said we cannot pay in rubles. The contracts say dollars. And Russians stopped supplying gas and oil in Bulgaria. There are a lot of voices in Bulgaria saying, oh, we will freeze in the winter. It will be a heavy hardship. It will be horrible. We should continue with Russia. But the government did the right thing. They basically found alternative sources of gas and oil. And today, most of the countries in Europe stopped buying Russian oil and gas. They found alternatives. They went to Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Saudi, Qatari. And there was a hardship, but I think that sacrifice, that short-term sacrifice, made a long-term gain. And that long-term gain is not only moral. We are not only proud of doing the right thing against an aggressor, it is also pragmatic. We are better now if we take just the economy or just the future perspective of the economy. Because relying on Russian oil and gas on a country that is basically collapsing its own economy is not a long-term sustainable strategy for me. So the Bulgarian experience is interesting because I often am speaking to audiences and that question comes. And yes, it was. We have a lot of nationalists in Bulgaria, by the way. They were shouting against the government of not doing. They are pro-Russian. There is a pro-Russian party in the Bulgarian parliament. And they are very much protesting against that more. But the government had the courage to go against that and to explain that we do the right thing morally, but also pragmatically. Over time, you see the alternative way of dealing with that. It happened. Remember the sanctions on Iraq. The same story. I was a junior diplomat when the United Nations Security Council imposed the sanctions. Bulgaria had big projects with Saddam Hussein. A lot of economic benefit came from Iraq and later from Yugoslavia and Libya. So the countries that Security Council imposed sanctions in the early 1990s were the countries where Bulgaria had brilliant economic relations. Iraq, Yugoslavia, our neighbor, and Libya a year later. All three. And these are Security Council sanctions. You have to do it. It's not a choice of the government. And in all three situations, Bulgaria lost economically, but over time, doing the right thing, in fact, brings moral satisfaction, but also economic benefit. I will stop here.
Thank you. So, Niranjan, how do we make sense of this within India? I mean, where do you position India? I mean, if you look at from the inside out view, what's one of the key factors of the BJP's sort of glorifying of the relationship between Modi and Trump has now sort of been exposed, if you were to see. And that has clear ramifications where even if India wants to compromise to a certain degree with its relationship with the US politically, because you have, I mean, what we have seen in the Indian context last 10 to 12 years is an extensive politicization of national security, foreign policy. And now you're seeing that that has its effects, which are being, sort of more or less being observed. So how would you make sense of what's happening within the Indian context?
Thank you, Dipanshu and Prachi, for hosting this very timely thing. I'm not a trade expert, so I'll rather dabble more on the domestic India specific issues and, of course, geopolitics. But I think that's a very, great questions about the politicization of foreign policy and security, and then of course the key starting point of my remark would be the Trump Modi, the tango, which we saw in the first term of Trump administrations. That bonhomie kind of thing about what a lot of people, especially the follower of Prime Minister and the right-wing crowd, we are going gaga over kind of the relationship that Prime Minister has built with Trump. And then second administration comes, the euphoria, everything disappears with the 25% sanctions, and then of course the another 25 secondary sanctions. Tariff, which is going to be even more damaging. So that has actually melted, completely melted. I think that is the key problem in our foreign policy, and the way we actually largely base our strategic relationship. We have over the years actually moved from the so-called strategic autonomy, what we used to call non-alignment, that will not align with any major power, and we'll keep the options way, to multi-alignment. We are part of the BRICS, we are part of the Quad, we are everywhere actually. So in a sense that in a sense, when the crisis comes, actually there is nobody with you, and we saw that during the India-Pakistan crisis, when you had Operation Sindoor or the thing. Not even your single neighbors for whom you have been doing so much, despite you will have always misunderstanding of the thing, but not one country even came openly supporting A. Whereas Pakistan, you had Turkey, you had China, several other countries. At least Pakistan is not a very friendly with many A. It's like a pariah, global pariah in many way, but still it had at least. So in a sense, this exposes our kind of putting so much of emotion in foreign policy. I think foreign policy should be based on rational calculations, because nations are basically working to protect their interests. It is very clear, whether it's America, Russia, the thing, when crunch time comes, they will look at their own interest. They will not, just because you are allies or the thing. I mean, Europe and America, for how many decades, it was like, the closest allies, post-war, and then just see the second Trump administration, everything has become so transactional, and he's been, the day from the day one, the way Marco Rubio actually, and then his defense secretary, the way they spoke in that Munich, this thing, the VP, the vice president. I mean, that's kind of language. So that's what I think international relations is all about. I think that, like that the famous it's what matters in international affairs is the power. It's countries, nations, they respect power. The weak one will suffer the way they should. It's like that what Thucydides said in that famous Penelopean War, that we will suffer. There is no way you can actually escape. Even if with alliance and all that, still you'll pay a price. So I think the damage to India, I think more than the trade, more than the economic damage that will already started having its effect. With 25% and 27 after 27 August, if another this is not removed, then it will be devastating. So apart from the trade the consequences, I think the damage, which is the permanent damage, is the psychological damage to India, because we based our relationship largely on psychologically. We haven't really to a great extent worked on strengthening our own actually kind of domestic or internal, or what I would call what someone like Rajesh Rajagopalan says, the material kind of power. On that we are still lacking. We might be claiming that we are the fourth largest economy, or in terms of we have reached 4 trillion other thing, but that's actually just a sort of selling to the outer world of the thing. But we know in our own domestic sphere what we are actually lacking. And number one is just look at our own business and moment. I mean, you all know it better. I mean, the investment is down to zero. Today, foreign direct investment of the thing, if you just look at it, it's empty. India's own private sector is not really eagerly investing. In fact, it is one of the lowest actually, and there you have a huge capital flight. They are rather preferring to go to invest in African market or in some other way than in your domestic aid. That's largely because since 1991, whatever we started with some of the key reforms with bank, it has not been really followed up with seriousness. Look at, I mean, even now, ease of business, our ranking has improved other thing, but you still look at, for someone setting up a business other thing, he or she has to at least take 2 to 3 years to start a major business. Starting with land acquisition clearance, then your issues about environmental assessment, that clearance, and then procedures, that you have to follow through every step with every department. There are 62 clearance you still need to set up an industry in India, even now, with, all your sort of reforms. So we still do not have a single window kind of, system, unless it's a semiconductor or some Taiwanese company is coming and Prime Minister PMO is directly intervening. It doesn't happen because much of the thing, because I deal with a lot of things on federalism, much of the things are actually sub-national issues in this country. Whatever the Prime Minister may say, PMO may say, everything ultimately boils down to the states. And in the late 90s and early 2000, we had a huge competition among the states. There was a, like Andhra was competing with Karnataka was competing with Tamil Nadu, and you had a kind of, series of reforms and many sort of chief minister who were very, kind of pro-reform kind of, chief minister of the thing. All that is today thing of past. Today we have actually entered a era of freebies, welfareism. It's just handouts and winning elections. So your reforms, everything is actually taken to the backseat. Because I'll just give an example of look at India. If you want to really move, one of your key sector is agriculture, because not that agriculture sector is very productive other thing, but much of your labor, people are stuck in that sector, which is not really producing any great day, and people are perennially in poverty largely because almost 60% of them are still stuck in the agriculture, and that agriculture sector is totally unreformed. Nothing. And government made a very, very kind of, attempt to get those 3 farm laws, other thing. It sat there, with despite the protest for 1 year, but then one election comes in UP and then those bills disappear, those laws completely. So I'm saying, in a sense, that we had, after decades, we had a government which had the absolute majority. It had, had a popular prime minister with everything. But then look at the reform records. It's not really inspiring. Here and there, few, maybe GST or few other, but there also you have problems. So I'm saying, it is this crisis, this what Trump has brought through, like a lot of people say it's Russian oil and all that. I think it's not Russian oil. I think it's about Pakistan, because I was tracking the entire thing. I think what you said, that man is infantile. He loves flattery. He loves, probably our sort of rakosh democracy, where you have debate in the parliament, and then the government was forced to finally say that no, it was not Trump, it was between India and Pakistan. We actually agreed to have a ceasefire, and I think that probably rankled that man. And you could easily see, till then he was not really putting any tariff other thing, and then you had So I think how we have to learn something from Europe, actually. European Union, how they managed, and look at this recent engagement with him, all the European leaders sitting there like school children, and it's not that they are not powerful and these leaders are not, they have also self-respect, but they want to do business with him, because it's whatever you say or this thing, it's still the number one superpower, and the kind of damage it can do not only international security or foreign policy, but to your economy, to your livelihood, in many ways it will be in jeopardy. So I think we have to handle Trump in a way, not necessarily compromising your self-respect or the thing, but there are way mechanism there has to be done. But I think we have to also look inward and look how India can actually improve its own governance record, its business, environment, and also time to also diversify our own sort of, economic policies, especially the export market. Our export market has to be really diversified. Why are we stuck to only few countries? What are we actually doing with how many European countries? What are we doing with Indonesia, one of the largest, country in Asia? What is our business with, ASEAN and other things? And why are we actually reluctant to join Asian trading system? whether RCEP or many other things. And that hesitancy, we don't open many of our sectors like agriculture. 40%, 50% tariff you have in agriculture sector. Your dairy farm, some of those this thing are completely with protectionist wall. You want to actually do that and then expect the world. I think we have to do our own math and we have to do our own homework properly. Thank you.
So I want to get Mohsin probably into the scene. And Mohsin, I think as you would start speaking and unmute, we would be able to see you more prominently on the screen. So instead of posing this as a question, one of the things that Mohsin Center, which focuses a lot on South Asia, aims to perhaps do is to look at the South Asian structure in the way it is evolving and changing over time. We have a huge China factor influencing the South Asian landscape at large. And now you see a pivot in the Indian position towards trying to restart conversations with the Chinese. As we know, China prioritizes economic growth and national security almost at the same, pillars of weighted importance. How would you read India's current stance? That would be one. I mean, not just domestically speaking, but strategically speaking in terms of its own partnerships, regionally. And the point that Niranjan mentioned, that agricultural space has been less explored for reforms for much longer now. So is this catching up with us? Because RCEP, India did not join RCEP largely for its exposure in agriculture and dairy. That was the same reason. And the current discussions in the US administration fell through because of agriculture and dairy as well. So what has happened really in the last 10 years? Have we not worked hard enough in reforming? So just to make sense of the regional scenario, Mohsin, if anything you'd want to add, complementing to what has been said earlier. Thank you. You have roughly 6 to 8 minutes.
Yeah, most of has been covered. Most of the stuff has been covered. So I was thinking maybe, it's better if the students ask questions specifically depending on their area of interest. Then we can do whichever expert they are interested in, or they can generally throw out questions. Because it's very complex, the one is what is the US is doing. That's one moving part. Within that, what Trump is doing. Then we have, as you said, what China is doing, what our neighbors are up to. And then what is India's responses, India's responses also have been quite haphazard, and scattered. So it's a very confusing and complex picture. First of all, what impact these tariffs will have on us? Is there any way out for us out of this impasse? And how do we now account for the new geopolitical picture? So, it's possible that this 25%, which has been imposed because of Russia oil trade, this may not actually be implemented at all. We may get an extension or it may be removed. But the base 25% is going to remain. That itself is higher than all our competitors in Asia. So how do we deal with that? I don't know. I think the era of positioning is over. India can't just keep leveraging and positioning, because you can't be a part of all of these groupings and then not do the actions which are prescribed by the groupings. India's earlier policy of non-alignment was very different. We were not in any grouping. We were non-aligned. That is, when we were not in the Western camp. We were not in the Soviet camp. We leaned Soviet later on because the Western camp rejected us, but we were non-aligned. And that allowed us to have some friends, at least in the global South. Now we are left with virtually nobody, because everybody thinks that, we are just looking out for ourselves. And if you're looking out for yourselves, eventually nobody will look out for you. So we are alone, whether it comes to with respect to Pakistan or China or with respect to the US. Our aggressive foreign policy statements by our prime minister and by our foreign minister will come back to haunt us. It appears as if it's the revenge of the countries we slighted, including the European Union. We made a lot of fun. Our foreign minister made a lot of fun of the Europeans and Westerners, and now we'll get back. They're also getting back at us. So it's not like just the US is imposing sanctions on us for trading with Russia. Even the Europeans are not happy, and we'll see the ramifications of that. But we'll go into all of that. I'll just open it up for the students, what they want to ask, what they're interested in.
Mohsin, we'll open it up for the students. We have a whole plan with students. There are a lot of questions which I have. So if I think I'll probably take that those were the remarks you wanted to start off the conversation, and then so there's some questions because the students, and thanks Saksham is here. I just probably raise your hand. There was a team of students who had worked on a list of questions. We'll put that, and there is a vibrant audience here as well. Just to sort of follow up and then maybe open it up for questions here, and I can add a few. So one of the things, Professor, would be interesting to see is on this tirade of economic nationalism, and the point that Mohsin also mentioned, that looking out for national interest over collective interest. Now, multilateralism, as the way it was conceptualized post the end of Second World War, identified there are core areas where countries need to sort of come together. And then you had this wave of globalization, the way you see in the post-90s period, where the Washington Consensus sort of led hyper-globalization, weighed countries to sort of abandon what was in their own immediate interest and then look for trade and financial integration. And you now had this sort of post-2008 crisis wave back under the wave of rising populism. The two larger contexts in positioning the geopolitical spectrum is in strongman politics, which is the point that you mentioned, but also economic nationalism or nativism becoming so paramount. And if that is the landscape in which the sort of global structure is operating, India might justify itself looking out for itself, but as Mohsin pointed out, it has alienated India. So has somewhere doing what you said as the right thing with Russia or not diversifying. So if you look at the data, India was trading with Russia on oil, as some of the students may know, less than 5% before the Ukraine war. It went up to 35% during the...
Because there will be violations, because there will be crimes, we need to keep the law as high and even higher than before because of those. So the response should be the opposite, not to diminish the law, not to ridicule the United Nations, because the United Nations is obviously paralyzed by the Security Council and the veto. And here what I did, I and my team develop a new United Nations Charter. We call it the second charter. I'm going to, by the way, tomorrow I'm presenting in the law school that paper, the second charter. We basically revised the UN Charter, how it should look like in an ideal world. Of course, we are not naive. It might not happen soon, especially in the current division in the world. But ideally, by the way, that's a point for India here. What we wrote in the second charter is that obviously the veto should disappear. The right to veto is no longer, exactly as you said, Sakshi. You said very well that the equality is jeopardized by the right of the veto. Why 5 countries should have the veto? I'm always asking this question. By the way, back in 1945, it was a temporary gift of the rest of the world to those 5. Basically, they said, okay, you are the victors of the war. You are united against the Nazi Germany and Japan. That's why you have the veto for temporary time. Only they gave him 10 years. In 1955, the charter should have been rewritten without the veto. That was the understanding. In the first General Assembly, 1946, member states already talk about revising the charter and removing the veto. That was back then. So I always ask myself, why 8 years later, that has not been done? And states don't want to talk about this. They worried to even raise the issue in the General Assembly of the United Nations. This is for me a big mystery. Why we kept the veto for so long, making those countries the aggressors of today, all of them. Britain invaded Egypt in 1956. France invaded Vietnam, and all the rest we know very well. We made those 5 guardians of peace effectively the aggressors because they have that extra power. And that's really anti-constitutional. Every constitution in history limited the power of the already powerful. Magna Carta, Bill of Rights, all the French Constitution. The idea of a constitution is to limit, not to double the power of the. What the UN Charter does is triple the power of those already powerful. They have everything. They have nuclear weapons. Why do you give them the veto and the permanent membership? How crazy we are to give those powerful more power and see what happens. By the way, I'm the only one among my own group who argue only not to remove the veto, but also to remove the permanent membership. And here comes India, Japan, Brazil, and South Africa. India, Brazil, Japan, and South Africa should stop talking about permanent membership. Do you want to join those aggressors? The 5 current permanent members? Obviously not. You are very beautiful and smart people. You shouldn't join the aggressors and the violators. Do you want to be with Donald Trump and Putin and Xi Jinping in the Security Council? I don't think so. You are much better than those. You should tell them stop. And we will not join you. And if those countries, BRICS, make a joint statement, we don't, exactly the opposite that they do. They claim permanent. They should say, no, we don't want permanent membership. For anybody, 0 permanent membership, 0 right to veto. And that's kind of the answer to your question about equality. Then you have equality. Often people say it will not change anything. Russia will remain the same. No. If you have a Security Council without veto, imposing sanctions on Russia like they did on Iraq after they invaded Kuwait in 1990, it will be a different world. Global sanctions work, not partial sanctions only by the Europeans. If the world imposes sanctions on Russia, if everybody stops buying oil and gas from Russia, Putin has no other revenue. He cannot buy North Korean soldiers. He cannot buy weapons. The war will be over. I will argue he wouldn't have started the war if he knew there will be global sanctions and nobody will buy oil and gas from Russia. So that will be a different world, which I admire to have one day. Personal interest, yes, that's a good point. Huh? We need to juggle those personal egoism and kind of try to find out how to please Trump. He's really not politician in a way of democratic representativeness. He's not representation of the, this is a long democracy, United States, and there are many disillusioned people in United. We need to see what will happen next year with the primary. But yes, I see it as temporary. You know, many people say this is a new era. Democracy is gone, rule of law is gone, no more human rights, don't talk about this nonsense. No, I'm not sure about that. I think this is a temporary time where the Western liberalism experiences its crisis. But I'm optimistic that it will go. There were some times in the past when, again, in 1930s, with the Nazi Germany, it was not better than now. A lot of dictatorial regimes, but in 1955, only 20 years later.
Yeah. I'll bring Mohsin because Mohsin lost connection. I'll repeat the questions, Mohsin, so that you can respond to that. One is a question that I can just read this out. In the context of growing global trade volatility and imposition of tariffs, how can India prioritize diversification of its trade partnerships? Basically looking at multi-alignment, which is the approach that it's tried to take. Is that the step forward? As Happy Mon, I think, just recently wrote, that multi-alignment has gone through its first major geopolitical stress test. And how do you see this moving forward? The second is a question which is on the imposition of tariffs on India's own sort of domestic political economy scenario, a question we were sort of earlier discussing. And finally, how do you see the reconciliation between tariffs, increasing protectionism, and a push towards FTAs or free trade agreements and bilateral trade partnerships becoming very crucial in a volatile trading landscape? Yeah.
Yeah. So I may not remember everything, but I'll try to reconstruct. India doesn't have much options, and multi-alignment, in my opinion, is a lot of hogwash. There is no multi-alignment because the United States is, a $36 trillion economy. Europe is about 19 trillion. And if you include some of the neighboring countries like the UK, etc., it goes above 20 trillion. China is about 19 trillion also. So these are the three countries. But problem is Europe. Europe can be a trading pole, but it is no geopolitical pole at all because there's no unity there. So it doesn't operate as a pole. So basically, it's largely in terms of pure power, it's a bipolar world, but with the United States being the much larger pole, of course. And there are not a lot of markets which you can replace the US market with, like China is not going to buy much of our stuff. Neither is Europe. They're already saturated. The others are too small. The basic problem is that Indian industry is largely uncompetitive. Our manufacturing is largely uncompetitive. So is our agriculture. The only part where we compete a bit is with services, but that also is in a bit of trouble. So unfortunately, we can't look abroad too much. We'll have to look at our domestic market. But there's another problem that India, there are some warning signs from the Indian economy. I hope we don't tilt into a recession. Because if we were to tilt in a recession, these American tariffs could be the last straw on the camel's back. I don't think these tariffs are by themselves so powerful, but if there is a general weakening of the economy, then these tariffs could be the last straw and could push us in. So I don't think we have a lot of good options. Regarding FTAs, and all our FTAs are very weak. We have the strong FTAs have turned against us. That is, we have a balance of payments deficit with whoever we have a strong FTA with, whether it is Southeast Asia, ASEAN, whether it's the Gulf, whether it's so that's why India is reluctant, because we just don't have competitiveness. So whenever we enter an FTA, it's to our loss. So the FTAs we have created with the UK, etc., and what we are negotiating with Europe are really hogwash agreements. There's hardly any relaxation of tariff or non-tariff barriers because we are afraid. The moment we get into an FTA, we end up with a deficit. So the government doesn't want to do it. There's pushback across the range, not just from dairy or agriculture, but from manufacturing. So I would say we don't have many options outside, and the US is not going to let India replace China as a source of imports for the United States. We're living in a dream world. Trump is not interested, and if Trump is not interested, I think this will continue with the next administration. I don't agree with Professor Popovski that this is a passing phase and things will be hunky-dory. Biden didn't remove most of the tariffs that were imposed by Trump in his first term. And it's unlikely that those changes will happen with whoever is the successor. Now, the only hope is that if Trump himself manages to push the US economy into a recession, which will mean also that the world economy will suffer, and India too will suffer in that process if the US goes into a recession. So we have to see what the full impact of Trump's tariffs are. Some people are predicting it will come soon. But they've been predicting that for a few months and nothing has happened so far. So I don't see a very hopeful scenario for the Indian economy moving forward. Certainly not in the export sector. And neither for the rest of the world economy. If you look at Europe, there's hardly any growth there. And not just now, for the last decade or so, there's been hardly any growth in any European economy, partly due to aging populations as well. So where is growth going to come from? The problem is the growing population is in Africa, but they don't have the income to buy. And China itself is declining in terms of population. So the only real growth engine was the United States. It was growing at about 3%. And when you have a $36 trillion economy, that means you're growing at about 1 trillion every year. So it was creating growth. Now there are no really big growth engines left. And whatever is left, China is going to saturate those markets, because as China is blocked from the US market, it has so much excess capacity, it's going to it will saturate the other markets. And India itself, most of South Asia has become a Chinese vassal, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Slowly, India also, it seems from the Prime Minister's behavior, that India also is gone as a vassal to the Chinese. We have gone with a begging bowl, and China is going to treat us like that. I think China is going to overwhelm us also. So we are going to be stuck with a giant next door who is also now desperate, because the Chinese have created such huge overcapacity. They have huge unemployment at home, youth unemployment, and they need to push these goods out somewhere. So we are in a really bad situation. I mean, our foreign policy has been a mess. Our economic policy has been a mess. And I foresee a really bad time coming for India. I'm sorry, you're all going to graduate soon. So I feel bad saying that, but it's going to be a tough time.
So on that optimistic note, perhaps taking the conversation forward. So the only one slight divergence, because we both observe the economy, and I look at some of the numbers. So India is not particularly in that bad a position. We're performing suboptimally, definitely to our potential, but it is over 6% of growth, and the numbers do give you a picture. We've been debating a lot of the GDP numbers, but it doesn't mean that we are under measuring what it is more under measurement than anything else.
These students
But-
will find
but-
out.
No, but there are some points that Mohsin has made. I think that merits a larger conversation, maybe for another dialogue. But one of the things which turns the conversation back to Niranjan, and then we'll take the final questions. We have to close this at 12:30. So one of the critical points is that a lot of this air and rhetoric around India's 1991 moment keeps sort of recircling amongst the mainstream channels. Every time there is a crisis, something is affecting India. Is this going to be another 90? The question real is about will and capacity. Like, does the state have the will to undertake? You spoke about state level competition. So FDI data will tell you that nationally we may not be increasing our FDI volume, and there are more portfolio investments going in and out. But Tamil Nadu has been receiving, as a state, a lot of foreign direct investment and remittances as well. And there are examples of states which are trying to do things differently despite their constraints and giving us a sort of a positive picture. Can the national government, which has tried its level best to, centralize power to make states not be at the front, take this moment to concede the power to states which are doing relatively well, give that breathing space, and then see how things go? So that would be something that we would love you to sort of reflect on.
I think that's a very good question. I think centralizing tendency in last 10, 11 years is a matter of concern, actually, because we are a deeply federal, country. And almost before we had this kind of, return of the single party dominance since 2014, for almost 25 years, we had series of, coalition governments. And coalition period actually saw the real, flourishing of, your federalism, subnational governments, the autonomy, as well as, democratization really took shape. Before that, you had in the Congress years, you had almost like a one-party dominance, and everything was like, decided from Delhi, and then states have to just enforce. So it was top-down kind of things. So we saw that decentralization, devolution, and federalization in those 25 years, and that actually brought. That is where I was giving the example of states were competing with each others, and whether it's seeking investment or bringing reforms to be more attractive whether it's Andhra Pradesh, Chandrababu Naidu doing or S.M. Krishna in Karnataka was doing, and several other chief ministers who later on, joined including Navin Patnaik or even Nitish Kumar in Bihar. They started with bang, with a lot of reforms in the early 2000s. But most of the things actually, if you just leave out maybe Tamil Nadu or Karnataka or Gujarat, handful of states, I think most of the states have lost their appetites and lost that day. I think that's largely because of the politicization and centralization, what we are witnessing. See, a lot of decision making, why the, the last word should be Delhi? Why not the state capitals? And that sort of, that grand bargain between the center and state, which used to happen, largely because of the coalition compulsion or the thing, because regional parties also were part of the governments. So they had no choice, they used to do. We saw that during the UPA era, UPA governments, some of the most impactful, legislations came out from those federal bargain, whether it's RTI or, Narega, many things actually emerged, which impacted millions of people and opened up the, many sector of the economy in multiple way, actually happened during that period. But look at those last 10, 11 years, which ideally would have actually helped to take many bold reforms. But you name how many bold reforms we have actually. And some of the, including opening of, agriculture market, agriculture sector, which is vital, was, just dumped because of electoral politics. And then we have seen GST, which came through again, through a lot of federal bargain. It took several years actually to, reach. But ultimately, we ended up, bringing a GST which is so complex. Why do you need, now Prime Minister, thankfully, he has actually taken this stage and addressed in the August 15th address. But I'm saying why it took so many years, and people have been writing and saying that, this GST, 4 different kind of rates, and, some of the rates are really oppressive. Must go. It should be rationalized. Why can't a country have one just single rate? And when you have GST, why do you have income tax with different slabs? So I think these are also a thing in somewhere or other state also, both the central government as well as the states wants to keep the control. In the centralizing tendency at the center as well as states still remain alive actually. There are some flexibility to the thing out of compulsion, but by and nature Indian state is centralized. And that centralized impulse, which was brought in your constitution making, because we were created as a federal sort of country, but with all those unitary features. And lot of these things are becoming also stumbling block in many way. So I think we need to really revive that conversation. So I think both center has to take the initiative and probably allow the states, to shape their sort of way. In fact, 5-6 years back, center had actually initiated a lot of things initiated by the PM on ease of doing business, and many states were brought through Niti Aayog, that they need to really rationalize many of those procedures and sort of regulatory habitats they have, and a lot of improvement happened. But in last couple of years, I think everything has gone to the A. So then suddenly with Trump phenomena, everybody has woken up, and probably now, hopefully, I think with the crisis, which Professor Mohsin elaborated, the kind of that we are now looking at, both economic, political, and the kind of international sort of geopolitical crisis that we are facing. We don't have many choice, and we have to do, because otherwise what will happen, what he said, because I also keep tracking the China thing. Now, earlier we were in the more or less, seen very getting closer to the US camp, the Western camp of the thing. Now, suddenly with Trump madness, we are moving in another 360-degree turn to China, with whom we, for last 4-5 years, we have a major conflicts in the border as well as trade and many other way, although we are doing business with them. So I'm saying, just close, but China's embrace with China is more dangerous than US, because one, you are dealing with an authoritarian state. That's nothing transparent. And China can shut down your market, can do anything, can create havoc. It will not follow any international law or any sort of way. It functions with its own logic in many ways. And it's a huge kind of 19 trillion gorilla you are dealing with. And second, China is our biggest, neighbor, and we have a huge border. And we cannot, India as an aspiring, power cannot be subjugated to China. If we get into the embrace and depend everything and probably put all the eggs in Chinese baskets, I think that will be more dangerous than what, US thing might be temporary. Maybe another 3.5 years we'll probably manage. Once you have a change of power, other things will back, because in US you have a huge diaspora, you have a huge number of analysts and people who are pro-India. I think that will come back, and that will create again a favorable situation. Everything is not going to be destroyed in 4 years. So I think we have to be careful in dealing with China.
So just, I'll probably close this. There's a student there who had a question. I don't know if we will have the time for the response, but the question should definitely be there and we can then move forward. Please go ahead.
Do you think that Trump's tariffs were less about economic rationality and more about performative politics shaped by media to specifically target his voter base? And do we see similar dynamics in India where decisions can be influenced by signaling strength?
So that brings to the politicization point that earlier Niranjan was saying. It's an excellent question. I want to quickly read this quote before we give the final sort of space to Prachi to close the session for today on a very optimistic and happy, lucky note. But this quote, I think, perhaps can be a space for the next maybe conversation in the series. And I want to sort of take this Russia, India, China combined thing a little bit more at the center, and Professor Popovski can help us maybe set a good panel. And this quote is from actually Happy Mon's article, which just came out, I think, yesterday. Moscow feels, so I'm quoting Jacob, everyone here. Moscow feels a diminishing obligation to New Delhi and is unwilling to offer more support than it receives, which explains its lukewarm backing during India's clash with Pakistan in May. Russia's public statements at the time were vague. They neither mentioned Pakistan by name nor endorsed India's military reprisals, but simply called out for settling disagreements diplomatically. In a sense, Russia echoed India's own messaging after the 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Nevertheless, the statements alarmed New Delhi's Russia watchers who expected the Kremlin to stand by India, condemn Pakistan, and affirm India's right to retaliate. Longer question being, has India, which is the point I'm trying to make, given too much of space to its Russia partnership? And is nostalgia a strategy? The question is that India has sort of said Russia is an old friend and we need to stand by Russia by engaging in trade. And this is a larger context of a conversation we need to have.
Yeah, give me 1 minute, before Prachi ends that, because I always kind of am very debating this in all forum I go. When India say Russia is our historical friend, well, first of all, it's not Russia, it's Soviet Union. Second of all, the person who signed the friendship agreement with India back in 1970s was somebody called Leonid Brezhnev. He's a Ukrainian. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. The person before Leonid Brezhnev was somebody called Nikita Khrushchev. He was a Ukrainian. So from 1955 to 1985, Soviet Union was run by 2 Ukrainians. And this was the best period of the Soviet Union-Indian relationship. So when you say to the Ukrainians, Russia is our historical friend, they will definitely look at you and laugh at you and say, no, Ukraine is your historical friend. People we signed friendship agreement were Ukrainians, not Russians. But also I'm Bulgarian. So if you tell to a Bulgarian Russia is our historical friend, I would agree with that, because Russia, nobody is better friend of Russia than Bulgaria historically. Russia liberated my country from Ottoman Empire. Our independence belonged to Russia, but it doesn't change anything today. Russia, yes, but Putin, no. We kind of compartmentalize those two. We need to divide those two. They are not the same. Putin acts against the Russians. Russians are those who suffer more than Ukrainians from Putin, by the way. They're in misery. Every city in Russia should have been looking like Shanghai and Dubai with that oil and gas. They live in misery because they have a dictator, a kleptomaniac, who took all the money out of those oil revenue and people suffer. So kind of that is important division when you say Russia is our historic friend. And often when I say that, people, but no, we don't mean Russia is our historic friend. We more mean like West is our enemy. Kind of imperialism, colonialism. And that's also recognized, by the way. The world recognized India as the biggest victim of imperialism in the 19th century and the first half of the.
So
then the question comes, why India, the biggest victim of imperialism of the 19th and 20th century, doesn't support the biggest victim of imperialism today, which is Ukraine? There is no other country suffering from imperialism today as much as Ukraine.
So just borrowing, I mean, nostalgia, I mean, for students who are listening, nostalgia or emotions, as Niranjan pointed, can be not a dynamic feature of guiding your foreign policy if there are any lessons to be drawn. Prachi, you have the few minutes, please. Thank you for the opportunity to organize this. Huge round of applause to Prachi and organizing team. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd basically start with a disclaimer because since the remarks by our panelists have been pretty critical about the geopolitical and economic crisis that India is actually currently going through, I feel like my closing remarks are rather reductive because I was thinking, critical, we have had such critical arguments and remarks already being made. I was thinking of, shifting gears and bringing, like coming to rather more centrist remarks and maybe end the discussion on a rather, if not optimistic, but definitely not on a pessimistic note. So definitely, I totally agree. These might seem reductive, as they are. I can feel that too. But again, I'll go ahead with it. So initially, Professor Popovski mentioned that there were actually no countries or allies that came out in support of India during the India-Pakistan war. And that definitely reflects the shortcomings of our foreign policy. There's no thinking twice about it. But rather than seeing India as this free floater that, again, we have been very critical of, maybe we can see it more in terms of, say, strategic autonomy, where we are part of diverse alliances like Quad and BRICS and whatnot. So as again, I mean, after there were additional tariffs that were imposed by Trump, we had the NSA Ajit Doval visit Kremlin around 2 weeks back. We also had Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. He was just in New Delhi yesterday or a day before. Again, the PM announced that he might be visiting China soon. So I mean, we need to also take into account this ability to shift gears. Again, we have been rather critical of it. I totally agree, and I'm definitely not saying no to it. But again, this ability to shift gears that when the situation requires one to do so, it needs to be backed with rather solid institutional frameworks and not just base it all on, say, the international relations on the charm of the leader's personality. Again, an argument made by Dr. Niranjan already. Again, I could think of this really interesting article that I just read in the morning. It came out in the Hindu today. It was written by Professor Yan Jose Thomas of IIT Delhi. He's a very famous economist. And he was writing about the role of India's youth and how that can be sort of leveraged when we deal with someone, say, bullies like the US. So again, the need for structural interventions so that India is seen as a formidable trade partner on the global stage. I mean, when the trade tariffs were initially imposed, China was the worst impacted, right? More than 100%. And after a good deal of, trade talks and whatnot, the tariffs imposed in China are way lesser than what we have, in India's case right now. So again, a lot of reasons behind that, but also there are a huge source of critical minerals and a lot of that stuff. So a lot of reason behind that. But yes, something that India always needs to take into account and to also leverage the country's demographic dividend, because apparently I found it very interesting when Professor Thomas mentioned it in his article that apparently one in every 5 1/5 of all of the world's young population is basically Indian. Yeah, so something that we should be thinking of leveraging, because a lot of skilled labor is going to the West, has been going since the 70s, how that can be leveraged when we, sort of place ourselves on the global stage. So yeah, I think that would be it. Once again, thanking all the panelists for their wonderful remarks, for their presence, for agreeing to do it with us, and our chair, Professor Mohan, who's always, thank you.
Thank you, Mohsin. Thank you. And we'll take the conversation forward. Thank you, Nasima, Nirmal, Saqib. Again, a round of applause to everyone. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.